Could you just restart that intro then?
Jay, I was, as you were
Anywhere
speaking,
near
I was
the
like,
same.
this is such a beautiful rendition of game A,
Yeah.
game B. And I'm like,
thanks.
I'm just in awe, like, yeah, that's great. Keep going.
This is a call I had with an amazing team working on an information commons. We touched on the learning map, the doing map, the innovation markets, their work, a bit about my work. It was a general conversation on these items, on these ideas, and I hope you enjoyed.
Well, second rounds are always different, but what has brought us here today, right? So we've come together through this group, through a community. It started on Facebook and Discord. Now it's on a mighty network, and it's around this notion of Game B, where there are several thinkers contributing to this big challenges we face as a society. And it sort of looks at history of civilizations, rise and fall, and how we're moving into a distinct set of challenges where we are now at a globalized civilization with exponential technology on top of it. And we have quite a few layers and aspects of meta crisis, as it's described often, layered into there. There are a huge number of projects that are emerging that are looking to address pieces of this. And we came together to think about how are we managing the information commons in this space. We want to help catalyze action into projects. And how might there be a better way to have sort of this collective information commons be structured that would facilitate these goals. And so when we came across your work, we thought, wow, Bodo's been doing a lot of similar stuff. Let's reach out and see if perhaps he can help or contribute, or what might come from the engagement.
Also, I want to echo your thoughts in that we seem to be taking a few steps forward every now and then, but it's nowhere near the speed at which we need to be moving forward. And I keep thinking, what are the various different frictions that are causing things to slow down and grind to a halt? For example, how do we document these things? Not only how do we document them, but putting them on a wiki is great in one sense, but how does someone else then use that? How does that piece of innovation discovered, and then how is that then utilized? And then there's the query of how is that piece of information licensed? There's so many awesome licenses, but the point is that there are so many, and so that's a huge challenge as well. I mean, there's a number of challenges. I love that the way you described game A and that we currently in game A, we want to move to game B, and thinking of the problem in terms of game theory and how humans actually are structurally incentivized to work with one another or not to work with one another, and how the structure can therefore be changed in game B to accomplish a different end. Because at the moment, game A seems to be a zero-sum game with the end being one very rich person, everyone else not being rich, and that's a zero-sum game. How is game B going to be structured differently? I love that way of thinking.
Yeah, we don't. We have many more questions than ideas and very far from answers. But one of the notions is this sort of fractal reality or holonic structure, nested holes. And it just had a conference where there was an indigenous elder describing the way that sports are played in the indigenous communities, and that there's never a winner put on a pedestal, and that the kids are actually fearful of any isolation. They want to stay with the group. And I hadn't shared that yet with the rest of the team, but it reminded me, in one of our recent discussions, we were talking about the different, like button or upvote, and how the nature of online conversation often biases towards the inflammatory or the more definitive, the more kind of, outrage potential eliciting type of content. And there's often this performative, ego-driven, backdrop to that sort of content creation.
Right.
And so we had some ideas and some thoughts on how might we redesign the way in which information is presented, where we were trying to incentivize a different type of conversation.
Right. But maybe we don't need to know how to solve this problem. And I keep thinking of bacteria, for example, or ants, or even neurons in the brain. Individually, they are quite stupid, and they never need to understand the full plan. And yet they are, through very simple rules, able to create something that is on orders of magnitude greater than even the sum of their individual contributions. It's an emergent phenomenon rather than something that is designed necessarily. And the way that I think the solution to this challenge could be structured is, humans already are in a collectively intelligent system. There's already some type of collective human intelligence that is greater than the sum of all humans. But the communication mechanisms between every dumb node, as in every human, is there's a lot of friction. And so the intelligence that is able to be produced is severely hindered. I wonder, and this is an open question, I wonder if we were to focus on the simple rules of the game and the reduction of the friction between the nodes, could that create a solution that no one is able to actually design? That's an emergent solution.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
That's kind of one of the conclusions I've been coming to in the past couple of weeks. I've been learning more about collective intelligence, and there's been a lot of research on it. And there's this one author who wrote Big Minds, and he was laying out the principles of collective intelligence, whether it be from a state or a university or a business or a team, like a sports team. And it seems like there are principles and there's downsides to and trade-offs to some of these collective intelligent systems. But as far as building a platform, instead of designing every niche of it, how can we facilitate sorry, my dogs are barking in the background. How can we facilitate the principles in a dynamic nature so we don't have to get it right, but it can be ever flowing back and forth between the different principles?
Yeah. I wonder, Bodo, in your work, from what I've seen so far, I loved the descriptions of, I love the Lego analogy and sort of the laying concepts. And I see how that can be applied brilliantly for it's like a 3.0 or 4.0 of a syllabus, right? It's just a much better way to navigate and accommodate for divergent paths along a goal. But it seems to rely on existing information that's already sort of curated, and these are good sources. I wonder if it also includes, or if you've thought about how that information becomes blocks.
So what you're talking about is the learning map. And you're right that, so there's three mechanisms I think we could use to generate a learning map. And just so that we're on the same page, that a learning map is essentially a knowledge graph of concepts that can be learned. Unlike a traditional learning path where you learn these concepts in a particular order, in this particular linear order, that we map those paths on a knowledge graph so that it visually it looks like a web, where every concept is actually linked to multiple other concepts. Overlaid on top of this, you could have the pathway. I keep thinking of this as an analogy that makes sense to a lot of folks. It does break down at some point, but the analogy is to think of it like Google Maps, where the first thing you do is you try and create a generic map of the world. And in other words, you try to figure out where are all the cities based, where are all the towns based, where are the countries based, where are these things? And we can generate that general map of understanding by looking at Wikipedia as an example. Wikipedia is a really good ontology of human knowledge. It provides some type of structure. It also has links from one page to another. There's no directionality with those links. They're bidirectional, but it provides some type of structure. And we could think of that as creating the earth on top of which Google Maps is now going to be built. So there's that point. The way that we generate the roads that connect these points is by looking at existing educational material. And these could be YouTube videos, textbooks, stories, videos, movies, anything that has a narrative structure. And the way we do that is we look at this narrative structure, let's say a YouTube video. We look at all of the concepts which are being mentioned within that video and what the timestamps are, right? And then we understand that, okay, this particular person has chosen to teach us all about, I don't know, oil painting, for example, and they chose to teach us oil painting using these concepts in this particular narrative order. And so we understand that at least for this person, he or she chose to teach this particular topic within this narrative framework. But that's just one example. And we do that a million times for a million different people teaching the same concept, and you get a whole big mess of a map. But that's a really cool way of thinking of it. And the one reason why I think this is interesting is I was, as an experiment, I was working at a music school who, instead of hiring music instructors to do the teaching, they hired famous musicians. And so what was interesting is I interviewed a lot of these musicians. I didn't tell them what I was doing. They assumed I was just interviewing them as part of the story or whatever the case may be. But what I was doing is, and I went through a pretty long form type interview session where I asked them, okay, where did you start to learn music? Where did it all spark from? And then every time they gave me the answer, instead of writing down the story, I looked at what concept are they talking about? What concept did they learn initially? And then I asked, okay, so what did you learn next? What was your next stage? And then they told me their story. And then instead of writing down the whole story, I just looked at what is the concept, what is the underlying concept that they learned at that stage. And then once I did that for the interview, I took the concepts that they learned in the order in which they said they learned those and mapped that onto the learning map. And then when you do that, you would see this person who's now a super professional musician, but bouncing around in all of these different ways, right? And you present that to an instructional designer, and the instructional designer would say, oh, this is a piece of shit. You can't create a course like this. No one's going to learn anything. And what's interesting is you could even present that course back to the same musician and try to distract him, right? Him or her, say, hey, what do you think of this course? Even they would not recognize the value of choosing to learn that way until you explain, well, actually, this is the way that you shared with me that you learned. And it's weird that that's the way that humans learn, is we bounce through these ideas, and it's the culmination of all of these separate ideas that teach us. So that's when my thought of how to create the map actually falls down. I've been looking at the map and generating map through deconstructing educational material. We can't focus on educational material that's been designed by experts only. There's a place for that, but we need a whole diverse range of these stories. And that's why I think deconstructing random YouTube videos is really an important way to do it as well. Deconstructing random books and stories and all of these different experiences creates a far richer map. And then the third way of generating the map is regarding all of these things as purely a seed, right? You don't want to hard code any path. This is just a seed. And then allowing users to blaze their own trail. And this is very similar to the way Google Maps works. they look at the traffic data of people driving and how quickly they can get from point A to point B. And they update their recommended routes based on that real-time data coming back, so that they can take into account things like traffic, accidents, new roads, roads changing, direction, whatever the case may be. They can take advantage of that in real time. And so I just like Google Maps directions are an emergent phenomenon of Google Maps, I think the paths in which people take to learn should also be an emergent, real-time or emergent path.
Yeah. Wow, there's so many things that would be fun to pick up on this. I wonder, perhaps a distinction between the learning map and the knowledge tree, or the tree of knowledge, where that is where the creation happens. And that is where perhaps that's where the professors are meeting at the coffee and discussing their work. And that's when they go into creating or have working groups, or that's when people in chat threads are hashing out and debating.
Yeah.
And then something gets crystallized in a form, it gets put into a video or to some digestible form, and it enters into a potential learning landscape that can be mapped and created.
Yeah.
And then it seems there's a huge degree of difference in the intrinsic motivation of the learner, and whether it's, I need to get from point A to point B and I want a better route, but I have to get to B because I'm in third grade and I have to get there. Or if it's, I'm just passionate about music and I'm going to follow my passion and I'm going to navigate that. And I wonder if there's some degree of braving the unknown on your own path that for some people is a part of that, that enriches the learning experience. And how much of, do you know, I can't pronounce his name, but the researcher on flow science, so the right amount of challenge versus ability,
Right.
And that there might be some palatable amount of information to have in front of oneself before being overwhelmed. So if it's like, I'm building a village right now, and this project has a huge number of elements to it.
Yeah.
And if it was all in front of me as like, here's everything you need to know, go. I may go slower than navigating around and finding my way and meeting people that can be guides along that path, and helping me get grounded, because there's kind of there's limits to our cognitive capacity of how many things we can hold on deck to be ready to ingest.
Well, I think you're highlighting a really good point, and that's why I work on two sides of the coin. The one is the learning map, and the flip side is the doing map. And it also relates to how we initially started the conversation with Brad, soon becoming a parent, and he's sharing his feelings that he doesn't know what to expect. And I in school it's the same thing. You learn all the theory, but until you put it to practice, you don't fully understand what it is that you learn. So you need to have both the learning map but also the doing map, and it should be structured in a way that you flip between the two all the time, that they're two sides of the same coin that live in the same time period, where traditionally you spend the first 20 years of your life on the learning side of the map, and that's only when you graduate and you finally get to go to the doing side of the map. And that's just the way that traditional education is structured. And I think that's a terrible way to structure it, because we learn so much deeper when we actually do the stuff that we're learning, right? It's irrelevant to learn how to write a business model until the time comes where you actually need to build a business model. You probably could do well to understand the basics of there's such a thing called a business model, so that you understand the landscape, but it's not very useful for you to spend hours and hours learning how to create business models and having no practical use for that at that time, because it just falls, your mind doesn't retain any of that.
Have you been in the unschooling movement and self-paced learning, and have you thought about how that would be applicable, these tools, as in that type of learning philosophy?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the core drivers for me starting this work about 10 years ago when my daughter was born. Uh, it's how do we create an educational system that really truly empowers her and taps into, like you mentioned, her intrinsic motivation. If she suddenly wants to learn how to build rockets at the age of 5, then that is a huge opportunity to suddenly teach her about orbital mechanics and the fundamental structures behind that, even though she hasn't yet done any algebra or any geometry or any such thing. There are opportunities that arise at, just like the musician, right? The musician started learning here and then bounced here and then bounced there and bounced all over the place. There wasn't any structured path. And sure, a structured path sounds like it's probably the way to go, because that's how you build a car, right? You take these parts and you put these parts together in the particular way, and out comes a car. But there's a difference between a a uh, a problem that is able to be solved by a linear solution than a problem which is within a complex environment. And learning and humans, we are complex. Um, we operate within a complex space. And what's interesting about a complex space is that you can't a solution for one is never going to work for anybody else. It's an emergent phenomenon from from the complexity of their environment. Every solution needs to be an emergent solution.
Yeah, and you have the compounding negative effects of if students have missed the essential building blocks, and then they pass the grade, they go on, they get further disengaged, they get further discouraged, and it dampens the intrinsic motivation, which should be what we're cultivating beyond everything, is the relationship with learning, at least in my opinion. And that's where school is far from fit for,
Bodo, where are you at in your journey?
Taking a few steps forward and many steps back, it seems, at every stage. The learning map has been a really interesting but frustrating project to get moving in any real way, and the doing side of the map, in some respects, equally so. So I've really struggled to get funding for this work for 10 years, and there were stages that I was able to get some funding. We did some crowdfunding campaigns as well, managed to get some grants, and managed to get some contracts along the way. So work has gradually progressed, but I haven't been very successful in raising funds. At the moment, I'm working with an organization called Guru on the learning map, and we share so many of the same principles and philosophies, and Guru is all open source. Tremendous organization, really good organization, really well grounded in a desire to accomplish this systemic change by not playing by the rules of game A, like you said, by actually trying to structure new rules for game B. So I'm working currently with Guru. That's where I pay my bills, but they primarily working on the learning map side of things. On the doing map side of things, that project has unfortunately stalled due to COVID, because a lot of the projects on the doing side of the map requires teams to be formed. The idea on the doing side of the map, and just for give a bit of a explanation, is on the learning side, you learn the theory of how to do X, Y, and Z, and on the doing map, you should be applying all the things you've learned to actually build something. And the doing side of the map is built on deconstructing open source projects into bricks that you could build a project from. For example, you would have a project have a particular business model brick, some go-to-market strategy bricks, some email marketing bricks, some databases, technology bricks, and all of these bricks come together to create a project. Traditionally, when you document an open source project, you would document it as a singular behemoth, right? And you wouldn't necessarily deconstruct your project into bricks and create modules for it. But what's really interesting if you do that, and there's a really cool case study that I think you should look at, is the case study of the iGEM Foundation. iGEM Foundation is a foundation that started about 12 years ago now. They're a foundation that tried to do something simple. They try to accelerate the rate of innovation within synthetic biology courses run in universities and high schools on the East Coast. And they recognized that synthetic biology wasn't accelerating as quickly as it potentially could. And they wanted to accelerate that by getting students from universities all around the East Coast and high schools to work together. And they would then highlight the best projects at the end of the year and create like a bit of a co-opetition, and they would celebrate the best teams and things. And in order to take part, the teams need to do two things. One is build your project openly and document it openly. And two is document it openly in such a way that it is interoperable with other people's work. And so the focus here is make sure it's open, but also make sure that anybody can use your work. And you can imagine this. So this nonprofit was running for 12. It has been running now for 12 years. For the first 3 or so years, the projects coming out of this nonprofit were mediocre high school, university type projects. Nothing to really get excited about. But what happens then, and this happened quite quickly after then, is now suddenly third year the third year this was running, the fourth year this was running, now suddenly has 3 years worth of work that it can build on, right? So now students don't need to start from square one. They can look at a library of all these open interoperable bricks and say, you know what, I'm going to grab this idea and this idea, join them together. And now suddenly I'm not starting from square one, I'm starting from stage 3 or 4, whatever. And so the quality and the complexity of the projects coming out of this nonprofit started to accelerate. And now we're looking at 12 years on, and the work coming out of this nonprofit, which is completely open source, is competing with some of the most well-funded research labs. So much so that organizations like Kaiser Permanente and Pfizer and all these big labs are struggling to patent some of the work because it's all open source, it's all openly documented by these students who in their mind shouldn't be able to do any of this. And yet these students are able to build on to what other students have done over the course of 10, 12 years and create solutions that are competing with some of the most well-funded research labs. So what if we use that same approach and we focused, instead of on synthetic biology, we focused on solutions like the Sustainable Development Goals? How do we solve water purification, gender violence, renewable energies, all of these big challenges that are well documented and structured within the United Nations? And a lot of schools already use this as a foundation on top of which to teach various courses. We could use the same approach. We could look at all of the schools that are busy teaching this. Let's get them to leverage a decentralized way of, or a platform in which students are now encouraged to document their projects within these modular bricks that need to be documented as interoperable bricks. The schools can use these to judge the students' abilities and their skills. So it aligns well with the universities or the high school's agenda, but also if it were to be framed under the umbrella of something like UNESCO, where where universities and schools are encouraged to hand over their IP openly under a Creative Commons share-alike license, under a database which is housed under something like UNESCO. The feeling I have is that universities and schools would be comfortable doing that, but two, I think we could experience the same type of result as the iGEM Foundation has experienced. In that, could you imagine a world in 12, 15 years from now, where the solutions being designed by students are outcompeting some of the most well-funded solutions on gender violence and renewable energies and all of these things. And because it's being generated by students within an environment where they are incentivized to share and share alike and learn from one another, that suddenly creates a structure that you have all of these awesome solutions which are competing with really well-funded companies out there, but it's all open source, and that's a wonderful thing. But there's one challenge in that the iGEM Foundation hasn't yet solved, and that is the challenge of attribution. At the moment, the winners of the iGEM Foundation get to choose where they want to work. Like, everybody is hunting the students that win the iGEM Foundation and offering them ridiculous salaries and a lot of the so they are claiming reward, but theoretically that reward belongs to everyone within that 10-year history that has contributed to the idea, right? They were only the ones that put the final straw onto the camel's back, so to speak. That's not a good analogy, but you know what I mean. They were the ones that added the final bits that made it super successful. So how do we accurately allocate reward to the whole chain of 10 years worth of work that went into that is a question that I'm trying to figure out, but that is definitely something that needs to be solved. But if we can get that right, if we can get the motivation right, the interoperability right, and the share alike license where everything is shared alike and people can't artificially patent an idea and monopolize it, because as soon as you do that, innovation stagnates. You don't want that to happen. But at the same time, ensure that everyone that contributes to ideas is fairly rewarded for their contributions. Then I think that changes the fundamental structure of the world, the fundamental game structure. And what I think is nice is it does so from the ground up, right? It does so in a very sneaky way by creating a structure where the students and learners are generating the world that they are going to move into themselves. I think it's an exciting approach.
It sounds amazing. I love that example, and the application makes complete sense to extend into another arena.
I agree. So you're touching on the innovation market. I know you noted in your book that you didn't write that chapter, or a lot of it was from another person.
Yeah.
But to your knowledge, how complete is that theory, and has that theory ever been demonstrated or replicated?
So the theory is being tested at the moment using GitHub as the seed. So what is nice with GitHub is you have a history of open source projects that are each leveraging 101 different open source projects, who in turn are also leveraging 101 different open source projects. Plus, you have a history of the developers and who's contributed code to each of those projects and when and how. So we could theoretically use that as a data set and then arbitrarily assume how much value each contribution gets, right? And we don't need to be accurate at this point. We don't need to figure that challenge out, but we can arbitrarily say, okay, if you submitted a piece of code and that was 10 bytes worth of change compared to another submit, which is 20 gigabytes worth of change. And even though that's, I'm not saying this is the way we should do it. This is definitely not the way we should do it, but we can use that as an analogy, saying, okay, the person that gave 2 bytes, let's give them 0.2 tokens. And the person that gave 2 gigabytes, let's give them 200 tokens, or whatever the case may be. And then let's use historic data to see how that actually flushes out, and then start to tweak the settings. And simulate. So there's a friend of mine is doing that analysis, and that experiment using GitHub. It's going to take a while before that all flushes out. I'm doing it in a slightly different way, working with someone else to actually create an evolutionary algorithm to try and see where that goes. So in short, it hasn't been tested. But we know of an existing system that works on similar ways, and that is the stock market. Contributors in the stock market are purely financial, right? You buy stocks in an organization, and so the market mechanisms are well structured and tested within the stock market.
So what comes to my mind is a real life example. In my community, I am part of a group that we're trying to do distributed energy, and I live in the city in Columbus, Ohio, and we're trying to build a 5 megawatt solar system. And right now we're prototyping what we're calling like a solar tree or solar sunflower, where you have a 10-foot pole high with an array of solar panels, and it rotates with the sun. And then the pitch goes according to the season and yada yada. And it's about $3,000 to $4,000 for this prototype that we're building. Under your way of structuring it, you can make it modular with the gizmo that rotates it and according to the sun, and how it goes up and down, and the solar panels and things like that. I'm wondering if I would put that on the site for open source, common share like thing, as you spelled out in your book, would people have to purchase that for some nominal fee to get tokens? I think I'm just a little bit confused how you'd get tokens and how that tokens goes back to real life money.
The idea we're playing with is when you set up your brick, you have the opportunity to structure your, so the complexity is potentially exponential, which again is not something that's desirable here. But the idea is we give people 3 options. One is you retain full ownership of the tokens. If someone contributes, they can contribute, but you retain full ownership of the tokens. The other option is the brick shares tokens to whoever contributes. Every time someone contributes, and this could be a contribution of code, it could be a contribution of finances, it could be a contribution of a network, it could be whatever contribution that is. Anyone who makes a contribution to that instantly gets some tokens back. And then the middle option is some type of variant between the two. You can say, for example, that 50% of the BRICS tokens are retained by the founder, and then the other 50% is shared with whoever contributes. And the way that turns into real money is as soon as the project gets a revenue stream, or as soon as it gets a donation, or as soon as it gets a grant, or as soon as it gets an investment, that depending on which of those 3 structures you've chosen, that money, if you've chosen to structure your company as something that you retain full ownership of the tokens, then all the money goes to you. If you've structured it in this halfway house, then you would get, for example, 50% of the money, and whoever's contributed would get the other 50%. And the completely open solution is that everyone who's contributed to the company, to the brick, would get the money that's proportionate to the amount of tokens you have. And what that allows us to do is, as an individual who wants to contribute to a project, you can choose if the three projects are equally the same, right? And they're equally doing the same type of thing, you can choose to contribute to this project, in which case you get nothing in return, or you could contribute to this project in which you get 50% of the return, or this one where you get 100% of the return of whatever money's coming in. And I think that creates a well-structured mechanism by which, or well-structured feedback loop, which incentivizes more open behavior and more fairly distribution of income. But it still allows for, because ideas are worthless. So these three projects may have the same idea, but ideas themselves are worthless. It's all about execution, right? It's all about who can execute the best. So this guy who's keeping everything to himself may be the best executor ever. And he may have a really good brand behind them. And so it is not clear how this will all play out. But I think the simple rules of the markets will, one, incentivize a true free market where it's all about execution. Whoever executes the best gets the biggest portion of the market. It's all about execution. And two, it would incentivize more and more open behavior.
Okay. So in this example, if I already have a working prototype that I've executed and demonstrated that it works, there's really not a whole lot of incentive for me to post that stuff on this site because it's already done, correct?
That's right. And that is why I think this needs to be a bottoms up, ground up type of solution. And the reason, again, if you don't mind me sharing one story quick. So I worked with an organization called Ashoka, which is an organization that supports, it's the largest organization that supports social entrepreneurs around the world. And they're a network, and they provide support to these social entrepreneurs. And some of the most established and well-run social entrepreneurs are all within this Ashoka network. I've been working with Ashoka, and I explained this whole concept of the doing map and the innovation market, and how this could radically accelerate innovation within these social entrepreneurs' businesses. And I got the okay to reach out to these entrepreneurs and ask them how they would react and respond to this type of idea, where each of them would need to deconstruct the way that they do their business, deconstruct them, openly document them on this library, so that anyone can choose to work with and contribute and whatever else. The resounding answer I got back from a survey was, we love the idea, but no, we can't do this. Even though they're social entrepreneurs, they still operate within the zero-sum game, game A, in that they all still trying to get that one Gates Foundation grant, right? And they can't share their secret sauce, because if they do, they may risk that grant. However, Ashoka also works with young change makers. These are social entrepreneurs who are between the ages of 8 and 14. And these are amazing young humans who are doing amazing things. From Barbara Ali, who at 16 had built a school that was teaching 900 other kids. And he had, at the age of 16, he had several different teachers working for him. He was the headmaster. It's an amazing story. To kids in Haiti who are rebuilding the electrical infrastructure, to kids in Angola building automated drones to blow up landmines. These are kids doing these amazing things. I sent the same survey out to them. So the adults social entrepreneurs, 98% of them said no, they wouldn't share. I asked the same question to the kids, and it was almost the flip, right? almost all of them would say, yes, hell yes. I want to share how I'm doing my business, because if I do that, I can learn from others. Others can help me learn and get going quicker. And I can, what was really interesting is that a lot of these kids were getting inspiration from how they saw other kids solve problems. One example was a girl, Fatima, was doing a really good job in West Africa, supplying bed nets to villages um, around West Africa. She was at this stage 11 years old, and she was doing a better job at distributing bed nets than some of the most some really well-established NGOs. And it's a fascinating story. But there were kids in East Africa who wanted to copy the way that she was doing it, and so there were kids, and she was willing to totally share how she was doing it, and I think we can leverage that. The reason why I'm sharing that is that I think it's going to be really difficult to get existing people who are already operating within game A to change the way they do things. However, we can raise up a generation that already is entrenched in game B if we tackle that in a particular way.
Yeah, I feel that tension very much so in this last month for myself with doing the solar project in my neighborhood. And I also reached out to a gentleman that has invented a small to medium scale hot composting system where you don't have to turn it yourself. It kind of automatically does it. And it's an appropriate size for people doing community gardens or 2 to 5 acre regenerative agriculture projects. The problem is he doesn't want to share his plans and he's trying to patent it and sell it. So he's in that game A mentality, which I can't blame him. When we're trying to do the solar project and this group isn't necessarily a part of game B and has no reference to it, and I'm trying to share that, but things are already up in the air of how this is going to go about. On one end, if I lived in Jay's village that he's building and I can live off the land, I would openly share everything and, you know, benefit everyone. But when I have to pay mortgage and everything, I need an income source also. So I feel that tension. I wonder some of the disparity between the social entrepreneurs you were talking about, Bodo, and the younger generation is I wonder how much of that financial strain is on the younger people, where the social entrepreneurs, like, I have to pay bills and pay investors.
Yeah, that's exactly where the strain comes in. I think the younger folks don't necessarily have the strain of needing to worry about where's the food coming that needs to be put on the table. But that's the core reason why I think we need to solve the incentive mechanism and be able to distribute wealth back to whoever contributes to ideas. And we need to solve that before any such thing works. So the innovation market needs to be solved in order for this type of solution to work. But I think we could get it to work as we jump off the cliff, almost like we're building the plane as we jump off the cliff. Let's figure it out as before we hit the ground, hopefully.
A lot of this also has to do with the niche we select to start. And that if you can, like that example of the synthetic biology was specific enough that a community that already existed and had similar interests could aggregate around that and create value over time.
Yeah.
This space of regenerative village building just finished a conference, a global conference called Rebuild. So all these people around the world, similar projects. And there is a very strong social entrepreneurship ethos towards the work we're doing is more important than the business model. And it's such a common thread that pockets all around the world are talking about open source design schools for building villages, for meeting sustainability goals on local farming projects and regenerating the land and stewarding biodiversity. All of this, anything that falls into the SDGs, into the environmental movement, into the regenerative space, I think has a lot of complements to the open source ethos that it would be easier to kickstart perhaps than, well, I'm sure there are multiple arenas that this would be a fit for, but I think selecting what niche was specific enough and had an activated audience and, you know, people working that could contribute, and framing it in a way that is also a bit of it's marketing for them too. It's a channel to promote their work. It's a, you know, contribute your block and share your work, and maybe you'll find an investor or supporter, or you'll just be sharing your work. And you also do, because you have the deeper motivation than money, that it goes towards you know, this broader movement. And again, the blocks are nothing in themselves, it's the execution. I mean, you could give somebody a complete tool and they could still, you know, make it or not be successful.
Yeah.
I think it would be in our best interest to harness both sides. So if you look at markets and money, it's kind of, for, I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but it's kind of soulless. I can transact with Bodo without knowing him, without sharing his values, without anything. And I think that that's a powerful tool. And as Jay is saying, in our community, we are more open. We have shared values, shared vision for the future, group cohesion, and sense of identity, and we're willing to do things without that financial benefit. But it would be great if we can have both spectrums, but also have a mix. So like this gentleman that has his hot composting system, if he were to sell that to game A people, but people in the game B network were able to contribute to him to get plans, and be a donation-based system where he shares alike and we can share it, but he can also make money in the game A framework, that would also benefit. So people that share the same values and group identity can do less financial dealings, but also people that join, say, this platform that don't have any group identity and they're just in it for making money in the open social innovation can also do that. I think it might be in the best interest to harness both.